I mean, there's two things that really stick out about this M11 that have truly shocked me, that have impressed me. And one of them is the file quality of this thing. And we shoot, like we have an X400V, X Pro 3, probably not a surprise to most people, sit well above what these can do. That doesn't make it, you know, worse or terrible in any way. It's just the file, the dynamic range, the tonality, and just the overall clarity of the file, significantly better, noticeably better. When I compare this to the A7R4 and the Canon R5, which I had plenty of time with, marginally better than those. What makes this really impressive is that when I started comparing files from this M11 to our GFX 100S, the 100S beats it out. But these files sit closer to a medium format file than they do to the A7R4 and R5. And again, this is from my experience. This is just from me shooting the way I shoot. That has been incredibly impressive. The fact that this thing competes with a digital medium format but sits in such a compact package, that's a big win for a camera like this. The M11 ushers in the next generation of digital imaging for Leica, and it does so in a way that seems unlike Leica. You see, these cameras that they make, the M series of rangefinder cameras, they are built on this iterative process that feels proven and familiar. You have this clear window to the world with access to a massive suite of lenses over the decades in a compact form factor that delivers this traditional and iconic user experience. So when you see this new camera with a significant jump in resolution and a departure from iconic design elements, it'll raise a few eyebrows. As a working photographer and an owner of an M6, I've always had this thought of what could a digital M rangefinder bring to my workflow? Being a Fujifilm user and having some hiccups with one of the cameras in my kit, the M11 would be an interesting, albeit extravagant opportunity to find out if this camera can bring a noticeable jump to the value added to my workflow, or if all these benefits are largely exaggerated. I'll dive into the image quality with a good amount of detail because I think that's the most interesting part of this conversation. But let's recap a little bit what this camera brings to the table. You have a brand new full frame sensor that can capture images up to 60 megapixels. I say up to because for the first time, we're seeing a major camera brand employing some creative technology to allow the sensor to dynamically change resolution on the fly without cropping into your image. This means you can move down to 36 or 18 megapixels and in theory, more on this later, get more dynamic range, low light performance, and less noise in your files. The sensor now is also a backside illuminated sensor and it has this dual layer UV infrared layer, I hate to use that word twice, that is super thin. And what this really translates to is that while the sensor is jumping to 60 megapixels, you still get fantastic clarity, fidelity, and dynamic range because of these technologies that are brought to this sensor. Again, I'll save some of the juicy details for later, but let's go back to see what else this thing can do. There's a new processor that's being brought to this camera to help with the buffer and management of these files, but more interestingly, you now have 64 gigabytes of internal storage. And this is a remarkable feature because when professionals are clamoring for multiple SD card slots or dual card slots of any kind, I believe largely what they're asking for is redundancy, and that's what you get with the M11 without having to manage a second card. And I have to say, in practice, it was refreshing to have this as a backup. I could capture images, and the way I capture, I shoot RAW plus JPEG. So with every shutter press, it's actually writing 4 files, RAW plus JPEG to the SD and to the internal storage. When I got back to my desk, I could take out the card, offload the footage, and still play with the camera and review the files. And in an instance that I forgot to put the SD card back in, I could still continue to shoot. I wouldn't be out of luck. The departure from that removable base plate, this is something that someone like me would appreciate. Let's just get away. Let's depart from these archaic oddities that don't really add to the user experience. Let's go into something that actually has value. And the removal of this base plate brings in two notable upgrades. One, the addition of a water-resistant USB-C slot, where you can use this to charge your device and also connect to your laptop, iPad, or iPhone. But more importantly, you have now a bigger battery. I mentioned sort of the one big thing that has genuinely surprised me. The second one, you have this mechanism now where you switch it, press, battery comes out, much bigger battery. I don't believe it's as big as the one that's in the Q2 and SL2, but similar style where you put it in, click it into place, and you don't have this base plate to deal with. And it's much easier, but it doesn't stop there. The battery life is insane. Insane. They rate it for 1,700 shots if you're just using the rangefinder, about 700 shots if you are using the digital live view mode. We've used this for days across multiple settings. We're wrapping up here. We've gotten around 1,300 shots across multiple days. I didn't charge this thing, and it still has juice left over. That is crazy, because it just rids you of that battery anxiety when you want to pick up this camera. And to be honest, people that are going to be using this in a more traditional way, where it's not in studio, it's out, they're just taking it out with them every single day, knowing that you have this much juice, knowing that you have this much juice in your camera, your daily driver, that's the second most, or maybe even the first most important thing in terms of upgrades to these Leica M cameras. This thing is easy to access, and I'd say even easier to access than traditional cameras, where you flick the switch, press, it pops out, and you replace it or switch out cards, what have you. This thing has to be my first or second favorite feature, because what's a camera supposed to do? It's supposed to take pictures, and you don't want to shoot with this sort of battery anxiety. I've been talking about this since my first Fujifilm camera, where even some people would give me shit saying that no, the battery life is enough, just carry multiple batteries. No, let's demand manufacturers to improve efficiencies, to build bigger batteries, to make these things better designed so you could shoot for days without hesitation. And that's what this camera does. This camera, unlike any other, gave me the least amount of battery anxiety, where you could shoot for days without having to replace it. I would still say that it's worth investing in a second battery, but I have actually never been in a situation where I need to use my second battery yet. We're only a month in, so let's see how it goes, but I gotta say, the battery upgrade, it could be argued the best upgrade that's been brought to the M series of cameras. There's also this leap in the electronic shutter, fantastic integration with the Leica Photos app, more control of the function buttons, and even a stabilized view for trickier compositions with longer lenses. All of this culminates into what I believe are significant upgrades to the overall user experience of a digital M system. When you pick up this camera, it feels familiar and formidable, where it takes the years of muscle memory from my M6 and throws it behind a monstrous new engine. The 20% reduction in weight on the black model especially contributes to this feeling of improved handling without changing the script. One of the core reasons you invest in a rangefinder is for that zero lag experience in composing your images, and you get to do that with more ease, and I would also argue more accuracy. In the hand, this thing feels dense and well constructed. It doesn't have too many buttons, but all the buttons that are there, they're easy to access and manipulate. The groove on the back is just perfectly placed, and it's a great place to rest your thumb. And it seems like a small thing, but these are often the details. These are often the last 5 to 10% that many manufacturers screw up. This isn't for everyone, but photography purists can appreciate the dedication to minimalism. The menu system, it's clear, it's easy to navigate, and let's be honest, there's also a lot less to triage because there are no video features. And stepping a little bit further back, that screen on the back has a higher pixel density where it's very clear to review your images, and you can interact in some instances with it as a touch screen. And this one, it's very responsive. It's easy to navigate and works well to touch. Quite simply, you have the least amount of buttons and menus between you and image creation. The experience of using this kind of camera is mirroring an incredibly manual set of interactions with rich image quality. With no form of autofocus, this style of camera is not for most people, not by a long shot. However, for those that can thrive in this playground, you're in for a remarkable treat when the files hit. Can we be honest here? If Leica produced terrible or even mediocre images, they would not be the aspirational brand that they are today. The reason why these cameras are what they are today and the way that they're seen is because they are a luxury item that also produces amazing images. These images that a ton of professionals, especially those in the field, rely on. There's a lot to love about the files you'd get from a camera like Fujifilm or Canon, where you can have a good starting point, but here is what I've seen to be the most true to life color of any image file. Now, sure, like you can take any image file and then grade it to make it look like another and then add your style to it. All I'm saying here is that the starting point to my eyes feel like the most natural. That when I'm shooting reds, and more importantly, melanin-rich skin, the point at which I start seems closest to reality. And no, we're not gonna have a large discussion on reality. We'll save that for another video. These files are really, really good. What makes this M11 even more impressive is the improvements to the dynamic range. I did my best to shoot at ISO 64 wherever I could, and the result are files that not only have a ton of range to them, but remarkable details in the highlights of the image. Imagine being, whether it's in the street or in the studio, thinking that you've blown out an image and you bring it back and then you look at the thing and you pull a slider and there it is. All those highlights are brought back and still have detail to them. This sort of highlight recovery, this is hard for digital cameras to do. This is something that film has often, and probably still does, have an advantage in. But here we are with a full frame camera that can do highlight recovery better than most cameras on the market. The M series of cameras isn't exactly a studio solution, but I threw it in this environment to better learn how it handles and what it can do. One big surprise was that I didn't really see an improvement in dynamic range or noise performance when moving to 36 or 18 megapixels. In fact, the 60 megapixels seemed like they were better than the 36 and 18. And look, this channel, you know me, I'm not one to do these meticulous tests and pixel peep. It's more about the experience and drawing an overall conclusion and then stapling that to a workflow that you can replicate over time. In this experience, I think that the 36 and 18 megapixel files, when the sensor shifts to make these resolutions smaller, I don't know if third-party software like Lightroom, Capture One, Photoshop, Camera Raw, I don't think they have been tuned to really get the most from these files. I don't know. Leica hasn't said anything. I haven't seen any experts confirm anything. All I can say right now is that if you have this camera or plan on getting this camera, it seems like shooting at 60 and sticking to one of the base ISOs, ISO 64 preferably, is what's going to give you the best result. And you know, there's a little bit of a marginal drop as you shift down in ISO, shift up in ISO and shift down in resolution, but even then, they are marginal for the most part. Now, do I think Leica is lying with respect to the improvements you should get from 36 or 18? Not yet. I think there's still a possibility for this to be improved over time, so we will wait and see. Moving to the higher ISOs, it doesn't seem to be a massive issue. I found that I can go even as high as 16,000 and still get a usable file, where the noise that appears here is less of that color noise that you would see from something like a Sony sensor. It was something that you look at and you're like, okay, I can work with this. All in all, these files are noticeably better than what I would get from my X Pro 3, marginally better than what I've gotten from the Sony a7R IV and Canon R5, and sit just below the GFX 100S in terms of what I can do. And again, we're talking about a medium format digital camera and a compact handheld full frame camera. This is the kind of that's fun to geek about in the moment, but I don't think about over a large period of time, because all of these cameras are phenomenal in their own right. They all bring their own set of advantages to the table that will appeal to different kinds of users. I think the biggest takeaway for me is that with the Leica M11, you're getting a file that is true to the brand. That is something you would expect from something of this caliber. Oh, and there's always going to be this noise about why 60 megapixels? This is too much. Who even needs 60 megapixels? Hold on, shut up for a second. Let me tell you that when executed right, when you build this technology the right way, this is an impressive advantage for many professionals and even some enthusiasts. You now have more resolution for digital crop in the field, that when you have a prime lens, you can punch in and not lose a bunch of detail. You also now have something that you can crop in more interesting ways. You have more flexibility with your files after the fact. And also the advantage of when skewing your images, maybe in architecture or even in fashion, when you're skewing these images and losing some pixels, you still have a file that still has a ton of resolution left to it. So I get it. I get why people on the surface might be upset about more resolution, but if the technology allows for it, this is an advantage overall. Now, enough praise about this camera. Let's talk about some of the drawbacks and some of the improvements I'd like to see from this thing. Right off the bat, I wish the ISO dial was a push release where you can activate it with a single thumb or finger. You have to use two to knock this thing up. I know some people have covered this in the past. Some Leica users don't like the idea of changing this, but I'll tell you right now, I think this is a terrible design decision. Part of me also wishes that they used the same battery as the Leica Q2 and SL2. I mean, they decided to change the battery. They could have gone that way, and for some reason they decided to go this way. I'm sure they have their reasons. I just think it would have been better for the ecosystem if they brought more parity to the batteries and the charging and this whole system here. And I know that M lenses are not weather sealed, and yes, M cameras, though not officially weather sealed, are built like tanks and survive some crazy things and stories of people dunking them in water and all this kind of, I know all that, but I would have liked to see Leica make an effort to certify these things as water resistant, weather resistant, what have you, if only to just reassure users a bit more. That being said, I'm gonna take this in whatever condition I want, so I don't know if this really is a complaint. Now, I'll talk about some practical improvements that still can be made, but how about one more crazy one? The LCD on the back has a bit of a lift to it, and I can't help but think, well, why not make that thing tilt up? Even if it was just a tilt up. I really like to believe that the designers at Leica could execute this. I mean, if Fujifilm can do it on the X100V where it looks almost hidden, why couldn't they do it on this camera? And yes, it would be another departure from the Leica lineage, sure. But again, it's something that would have been practical, that you would have this thing that you can use for low angle photography and you wouldn't have to spend the $700 or $800 for a VisoFlex for this type of work. I might be on a lonely island for this, but it's something that I would like to see in a future version. Now, too bad, so sad. Let's talk about some things that they can still do for this camera. First, I'd like to see the ability, and I don't think it's available now, to change the features on the quick menu. That when you hit the menu button for the first time, those two rows of quick features, being able to customize that to how you shoot or what feature you need, I'd love to see that in a firmware update. Number two, I'd love the ability for highlight metering priority. This is something that Sony does really well. Now, you do have expanded metering options with the Leica M11, but having the ability to meter for highlights, meaning that if you are going and shooting during the daytime and the light is shifting quickly, this camera will meter the situation so that your highlights are never blown out. It basically takes a ceiling level and then captures the rest of the image. I'd like to see that feature brought to the Leica M11. Next, and I think that this might actually be happening, but having an actual mass storage mode so that when you plug this into your computer, it just shows up as a drive, or it shows up as two drives, internal, external, so you can drag and drop files and possibly tether with this camera. And lastly, maybe it's just me, for the focus peaking option when you're using a telephoto lens and the display to pull focus, I'd like to see yellow as a color option. I just find the red to be a little intrusive, and I don't know, you let me know. I'd like to see yellow as an option just so you can gauge focus in a way that isn't as intrusive. Now, it's only been a month and those are my initial observations. As I use this more and more and as we have more experience with it, I'll be sure to cover this in future videos and the different kinds of videos that we have planned if there's any other suggestions or ideas that I have. Now, many of you know that I shoot predominantly with Fujifilm cameras, so you're probably wondering how this compares to Fujifilm. I will tell you that the APS-C crop sensor is not a major issue for most people. However, when you see what this full frame sensor can do with backside illumination, with the pixel binning, with that dual UV infrared layer, you start to see a wider and wider gap in that image file. That when they're next to each other, you really see the difference. Another major departure is that as much as Fujifilm takes elements of the rangefinder experience, it's not the rangefinder experience. There are no manual focus lens with distance scales from Fujifilm. There's no way to replicate the experience. This is that system. This is a system where you can zone focus and in many instances shoot faster than autofocus. Big, clear line of demarcation here. And look, I'll tell you over and over again, the Fujifilm film simulations are a fantastic feature and differentiator. It really comes down to how you create. I like it for my street and in the moment kind of shots, but I'll be honest, when I'm working on client work, I bring these files into a linear response with no simulation and then color grade, apply my styles and presets and fine tune in that manner. So having a camera like Leica, I knew it was gonna happen at least once, having a camera like this Leica M11 where the files are just true to what you see brings me closer to turning over professional work and getting into the next image to edit. And lastly, and look, I'll actually make a separate video about Fuji and Leica, but one thing I want to mention here, the app. I have complained about the Fujifilm app since I've been on YouTube and doing this thing. And to have a Leica camera plug in or wirelessly work every single time over the last 4 weeks without failure, what a beautiful thing. Whether it was my iPhone or my iPad, in the field, indoors, in a studio, in a garage, whatever, it worked every single time. I think that's the minimum that users can expect. And if you're asking me, it's about time Fujifilm address this and make it work so that regardless of how many Fujifilm cameras you have or what camera it is, that the app just works. It allows you to transfer files and even for some remote functionality. The Leica M series delivers a consistency in user experience as well as brand expectations. This is a camera that retails for $9,000 US, and that's incredibly steep. While there are notable differentiators in a product like this and how it's made, I would like to see the brand work toward more accessible rangefinder solutions so that more individuals can experience this style of image creation. I should have put this in sort of the improvements section, but I feel like it's more of a thought that deserves its own time and attention. But again, when you are the only one that's delivering this experience, I feel like there's a bit of a responsibility to make some products that are more accessible so that new users, especially those that might not have the resources to spend this much on a digital camera, that they have an opportunity to shoot a certain way, because that might be what unlocks their next great image. I don't think I'm the only one here though. I think plenty of people have been asking for this for a long time. That being said, you might be wondering, do I think this camera is worth it? The short answer is no, but it's never that simple. I think a better question is, who would get the most value from a camera like this? And I think there's 4 people that would get the most value from a camera like this. One is existing M users that have been using the M system for some time in some capacity, whether it's film or digital, that are looking for a substantial upgrade because they enjoy the experience and they want something that can do it better and with more intention. Number two, Leica Q and SL users that have these existing Leica products and want something that can add to that workflow but provide a unique experience that contrasts what they already have while producing files that fit easily into their workflow. Number three, and this is also part of a group that I'm in as well, is mirrorless shooters that want a truly different experience, that want a departure from what they've been using so far, whether it's gonna be their A camera or just their B camera that they use in between. And number four, ballers, rich people, lawyers, dentists, financial analysts, people that have money. Listen, we can't escape this fact. At the end of the day, some people wanna buy products for the luxury, and this is a brand that appeals to that. So that is also an important segment, I imagine, for the brand. If I had to boil it down to one sentence, what is this camera? The Leica M11 is a luxury camera that produces remarkable images in a compact and specific way. It's unique because there is no other modern offering that does what it does, except for some of its predecessors. You can find plenty of compact cameras. You can find cameras that produce remarkable image files. You can find cameras that shoot in a specific way. Hell, you can even find luxury cameras outside of these series from Leica. But if you're looking for all of those things at the same time, I would argue that the Leica M11 sits at the pinnacle of that very, very short list. The goal of these reviews is to capture my experience as I take a product and use it in my environment across multiple weeks and share those experiences with you, with the hope that for anyone that's actually in the market looking for this kind of solution, that it brings them value, a bit of clarity, and helps them to decide if this is right for them or if they should look in a different direction. I've always been cognizant across all my videos as best as possible to mind my language, to make sure that I remind people that a fancy new camera is not what's holding you back from you and your next great creation. These are just tools, and let's not give them any more power than that. The thing that matters most is your understanding of light and your creative curiosity. That will propel you further than any camera could. If all of this sounds like a disclaimer, it's because it kind of is. I'm moving away from reviews kind of slowly, and it'll probably take a couple of years, but any chance I get, I want to illustrate's not the right word, I want to mention that it is you, not the camera, that's going to make the biggest difference in the images or even video that you are producing. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video, especially if you made it this far. Thank you so much. There is a contingent of you that wait all the way through the end and like and share and leave a comment. I truly appreciate that. And this year is a big change. I'm only making 25 videos this year, which is a big departure from last year or the year before, where it's typically 60 to 70 videos. And that is because I am reclaiming more of my time. YouTube has been incredibly kind to me and has given me the opportunity to focus more on my photography endeavors. So with all of that said, let me just say thank you for all of you that have supported me this whole time. But again, if you're not subscribed, please hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, like and share the videos. It does make a difference. It does help us go and do crazier, bigger productions. So as always, thank you so much. My name's Gadgen. Thank you so much. Did I just say thank you twice? I don't take it back. I'll thank you twice. I'll thank you again. Thank you. Thank you for watching. That's 4. And I'll see you next time.